Ocean Pines is a vibrant residential community nestled on Maryland's eastern shore. With over 9 miles of waterfront property, amenities like an 18-hole championship golf course and a public yacht club, and a rich history dating back to 1968. Of course, if you live here, you probably know most of that. And if you don't, it's almost all apparent from your first visit. Each week on the Pines Cast, we work to bring out the ocean pines that might be less apparent. We celebrate the region, the amenities, and, most of all, the people who make and keep Ocean Pines a special place to live. Welcome to the Pines Cast, your source of news and insights about ocean pines and the official podcast of the Ocean Pines Association. This is Tony Russo, the host of the Pines Cast, and this week I am joined by Rich Wirdzek. He is the chief meteorologist for WMDT in Salisbury. He's been on before, and I'm sure he'll be on again. He is such a charming guy and such a wealth of information about the weather in general and the weather in specific when it comes to the Delmarva Peninsula. And we talk a little bit about general stuff, but mostly we're here to talk about hurricane season, making sure you're ready for it, making sure that you've got everything you need. As a matter of fact, let's just get right into it. Here's Rich. So welcome back as we kind of stand here on the precipice of summer. We're recording this the week before Memorial Day weekend. This is the last of the high times for the locals and preparing to welcome all of our summer guests. So let's start off with an easy question. How was your spring and how was the weather this spring on Delmarva?
Well, Tony, first want to thank you for having me back again. I appreciate it. The spring so far has been actually kind of quiet with an asterisk there because we did have a couple tornadoes here on Delmarva at the earlier onset, or the onset, I should say, of spring season. You know, it was pretty active to start, but we've been pretty quiet since. And unfortunately, that hasn't come with cool and damp weather that would normally get us back on track, trying to get enough water into the water tables here. But we've just seen drought expand. Now we're in severe drought across Delmarva, so the spring has not been going very well here.
Do you feel like we're going to get that fixed this summer?
Yeah. Statistically speaking, we eventually average out in the long term, right? It's just when does that finally happen? Going on 2 years here, we've been dealing with this actually from a larger perspective. So with that said here, going into the summer, sure, I expect us to maybe change that a little bit. And, with the topic we're going to be talking a little bit more coming up, it would be probably from the help of the tropics that we get a few systems here that bring in a substantial amount of rain. And, for this part of the country, the Mid-Atlantic and the East Coast specifically, sometimes that's what it takes to break a drought.
And this, I hope I don't catch you off guard with this question. I don't mean to, but I've seen some apocalyptic El Nino things. What do you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know what you're looking at there. And, without going too much into the weeds, because this could be a whole separate podcast between El Nino, La Nina. People have heard probably both terms a lot. So El Nino phase, we're coming out of a long La Nina. El Nino phase is the warming of the Pacific waters. You're thinking, what the heck does that have to do with us out here in the Atlantic? Well, it disrupts the global weather pattern. It changes the orientation of the jet stream aloft, which brings in storm systems, transports warm, cold air, toward the poles, all the type of systems that drive our weather globally, right? So a strong El Nino, looking at it just from a high tidal cycle, can mean larger high tides, could mean for us here more flooding, because we're prone here on Delmarva, specifically here in Ocean Pines, to coastal flooding, which is typical with the high tidal cycle. And sometimes you get the full moon and extra high tide in that manner, or an enhanced high tide. So an El Nino could lead to more coastal flooding. That's the theory here. So, end of the world stuff, no, absolutely not. But something to consider, sure. We don't have a lot of room to give here when it comes to coastal flooding. Just minor coastal flooding happens for no reason, it seems like. You can have a sunny day and a little bit of an east breeze, and that's all it takes. So
what brought it up was my idea. We were going to be talking about some of the severe weather that we may have in our future. And because hurricane season is getting ready to kick off. And it's funny, it's just, even when I was in the newspaper business, it's the first week of June, it's like, you got to do a feature on hurricane preparedness, and still people get caught off guard. It's weird.
Well, you don't think about it as much because it's one thing to, prepare for the snow, even in as infrequent as snow happens around here. You get enough big snows that happen every couple years. People think about it more. It's more on top of mind. But, we can go several years without a big, hurricane anywhere near here or tropical system. So I think people get caught off guard because of that. It makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that, especially in the mid-Atlantic and into the Northeast, we tend to get caught off guard in these locations because the chances of us getting the Category 5 massive hurricane are pretty much none, right? And not to say it can't happen, but that scene that you see on TV with houses flying away and
Right.
catastrophic damage. Well, you don't hear about that. That typically doesn't happen here. So people get caught off guard because they think tropical storm, low end hurricane. What's the big deal? Especially when you talk about even just tropical storm winds, and that's where the letting the guard down, because so many of our problems come from tropical storms, meaning that the winds have not reached, that critical threshold to become a hurricane, or lower end hurricanes that are decaying or falling apart, if you will, as they move toward us.
And so, what is like the outlook? What do you feel like the outlook is for our summer? Do you have any?
So,
You know,
yeah, you want to talk about like just weather in
yeah, just
general or
what?
the hurricane?
Yeah, what is it usually like? And just to give us a sense, what are the
So,
average
give you an
hurricanes?
idea, the typical summer here, Ocean Pines, the Mid-Atlantic, Delmarva in general, the idea is that early summer, late spring, early summer, that tends to be our most active time for severe thunderstorms. It's our best chance to get tornadoes and such from individual thunderstorms. Our lightning threat starts to ramp up at this point. That obviously extends through the end of summer, but typically our strongest or our most problematic heat waves happen late spring into early summer. So like through mid to late July, if you will, we get some of the hottest weather here starting in this year, starting early in mid-May, but we can get our heat waves going at that point all the way through June. And then the official start of summer, not till the end of June, we've already had one or two heat waves. It's very typical for us here.
Mhm.
So that drives a lot of the violent thunderstorm action early on in the summer versus later on. So you get to mid and late summer, the opportunity or the chance for a landfalling tropical system starts to go up at this point. That's when the waters off the Atlantic coast are at their hottest and down to the south, and some of that activity really starts to brew in the Atlantic. So the chance of us having a tropical system somehow impacting our weather goes up as we go into August, mid to late summer. And then we get into late summer, that opportunity or chance for tropical systems impacting us starts to go up, while our typical severe thunderstorm chances start to go down a little bit. And that's kind of how the summer works. And you just kind of pick your poison there as far as the most problematic weather to worry about. That's kind of the cycle we go through on a typical summer in the Mid-Atlantic.
Is there any way to get us, because the hurricanes and the thunderstorms are not the same, but they have that same kind of, the low pressure and then pow. Um, do you feel like when we have these extended heat waves that can be a little bit of a trigger?
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually why we have some of our most violent thunderstorms in the first part of the summer to the middle part, because that's when we have our hottest temperatures. And that, I mean, it's the fuel for violent thunderstorms. It's the ground heats up the most. That heat drives these thunderstorms. And that's when you can get that, chance for downbursts, straight line winds, those kind of components that come with severe thunderstorms. All of that coincides with some of these really hot days that fuel these storms. We have something called CAPE. It's a term that we use in the meteorology world, convective available potential energy, if you're keeping track there at home. But
Yeah.
basically what that is the gasoline for thunderstorms. Those CAPE numbers that we look at, they go up as these hot days start to accrue back to back. The total sunshine that we can get day after day during a heat wave can really build up that surface heat that's needed to allow these thunderstorms to just explode. They increase the updrafts that you see in these storms. You can see them billowing in the distance, really tall into the sky, vertical motion with the clouds. You see a lot of that early to midsummer. And that's where we can get some of the most destructive weather here. Not just tornadoes, but as I talked about, straight line winds, downburst winds. Those are actually more common. And they can bring the same type of danger and destruction as small tornadoes.
One of the things, so I live by a baseball complex. And it's always amazing to me to be out in my backyard because the wind tends to come from that direction. It's gun on my head, westerly-ish wind. So blowing kind of more from the west to the east. And you can feel the heat baking on the field. And it's like it's blowing it at me. I take it very personal.
Yeah, I get I could feel what you're talking about just sitting here thinking about that. I know what you're talking about.
I know that there's a different reaction on the water, but there's also the same. You got a flat surface that's getting crazy hot and the wind coming off of it, right?
Right. In a case like that, you have the heat that's starting to build at the surface. So if you go just even 20, 30 feet above you, the temperature starts to drop. If you go hundreds of feet, thousands of feet above you, the temperature continues to drop, and call that a lapse rate. And on a day where there's a significant difference between the heat at the ground, like a very hot surface like you're describing, and then aloft, it's much colder aloft, that increases the lapse rate. That enhances or speeds up that warm air at the surface, basically traveling up into the sky as an updraft. So when you have a large lapse rate, that increased updraft, that momentum on a hot day will lead to more explosive thunderstorm development. So it's actually that classic, like the combination or that fight between cold and hot air that you hear people talk about sometimes with tornado development. It's a little more broad brush to say it that way, but that's an example on how to get a destructive thunderstorm. You have that heat at the surface being pulled up by the much colder air aloft, and that air continues to rise until it basically becomes the temperature of the air aloft, that parcel of air. And the higher it goes, the higher the thunderstorm tops, the more destructive the thunderstorm tends to be.
And so if it's not hot enough, let's say 20 to 30 feet, then that builds all the way up that way.
Yep, it builds all the way up that way. So sometimes you'll hear about, like we use in the weather term, you might hear this on a broadcast sometimes, a cap, right? Where there's an inversion, where the temperature actually goes up with height, somewhere above the surface. And on really hot days, you tend to have an inversion aloft, which keeps the air from rising. So that's why it can be like 100 degrees at the surface, but you have total sunshine, not a cloud in the sky, right?
Right.
And that's annoying when you want some cool rain.
Nowhere to hide. You're
right,
waiting
exactly.
for a cloud.
Exactly. So you need something, a trigger basically to break that cap. And a cold front will do that. It acts as like a wedge, if you will. The cold air is more dense than hot, humid air, believe it or not. People think it's the opposite, but cold, dry air is more dense. It's going to dig into the ground, if you will, dig at the surface, I should say, and kind of help to lift that warm air up. So if you have a disturbance aloft, an area of low pressure, which is rising motion, that can enhance that motion of air from the ground upward, right? And it'll break that cap. So when we get into these heat waves, you get this Bermuda high pressure, which is over Bermuda. It sets up off the coast, but you also have high pressure aloft, stacking on top of each other. High pressure is a sinking air motion. It creates this giant cap above us that doesn't allow that hot air at the surface to move up, create clouds, to at least give us a break from the heat during the day.
Hey folks, I just wanted to take a second to let you know that we are open to sponsorships here on the Pines Cast. Did you know that direct host-read ads are among the most effective means of reaching your audience? And the audience for this show is you and your neighbors. Not only do people tend to pay attention more closely to podcasts, but they tend to listen all the way through and not skip over the ads, especially when they're host reads like the ones we have here. So if you are interested in becoming one of the Pines Cast sponsors, please reach out to Sarah Ash. You can reach her at info@oceanpines.org. She is our executive producer, and she'll get you all straight. All right, thanks for your time. Right back to the show. What are some of the common effects of the tropical systems on Delmarva over the course of the summer and then into the fall? Because am I crazy, or do we really? This is cynical, and I apologize.
It's okay. I'm that way.
But I feel like we get ready in June, but if we're gonna get a bad hurricane, we're gonna get it in September, October.
Well, no, there's nothing cynical about that, because you're right. I mean, the peak hurricane season is not till September, right? If you look at just the statistics of tropical development, That doesn't start to peak until we're getting toward the end of the summer, right? So hurricane season starts June 1st, but it goes to November 30th. So having to remember that the waters down near the Gulf Stream off the Carolina coast and down to Florida, those waters, and then further south in the Caribbean, those waters stay warm, all the way into the winter. And actually what probably keeps a lot of potential tropical development from happening is that the southern jet's more active, and that'll shear off thunderstorm tops. You just don't see them develop during the winter in areas down to the south. So, for us, like you said, getting set for it, we prepare for it in early June. It happens. We get those kind of systems sometimes that are early development, but early developers, if you will. But yeah, you sometimes got to wait till the end of the summer into early fall for us, if we're going to get one during the season, to get it then. So it takes a little bit of time, but I think that's a good thing because that gives us some time during the summer to maybe do a few things, and we can talk about this to prepare ourselves before we get to the end of the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, tropical storms are no joke either. Just because it doesn't get an H in front of its name,
right?
Doesn't.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. I think a lot of us in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast specifically let our guard down because if it's not the big hurricane, if it's not the strong name, the one that the Hurricane Andrews, stuff like that you're going to let your guard down. Tropical storms with winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour, they pose an incredible threat to us here. And it's not about the wind. A lot of the times in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, it's in Delmarva specifically, it's about how much rain we get. It's the wind coming in off of the water, the fetch that can create coastal flooding combined with that flash flood type rainfall. And, you get these tornadoes that develop, these small tornadoes that are brief, but they have winds of 100, 110, 120 miles per hour, even 70 to 80 mile per hour tornadoes. These small tornadoes can cause a ton of damage, and we see that with landfalling tropical systems. So you have all these things that aren't related to your typical Category 5 hurricane where you just see the 170 mile per hour winds wiping off things off the face of the earth. So I think that we kind of forget that we have a ton of issues that come with these landfalling systems, even if they barely have a name. If it's a weak tropical storm, you get a tropical storm that lingers or takes its time moving up the coast, or it stalls inland, you can have, rain that's measured in feet. And, to go along with a consistent wind coming in off the water, that can be catastrophic for areas like this that are along the coast.
And what are the practical steps you can do, I want to just tell you a brief story. So I'm from Union Beach, New Jersey, which is one of the towns that was hit the worst by Hurricane Sandy.
Right.
And to this day, people still don't believe it happened. Like all the things that, we'd been there for years and years and years, seen all sorts of horrible storms and horrible hurricanes. And, the joke is the water stops at 5th Street, and that was just there was no storm ever bad enough for the water not to stop at 5th Street. And it covered the entire town.
And that was so you bring, I think Sandy's a great example of what, what I've been talking about. I'm actually going to bring up some stats on Sandy.
Please.
I don't want to misspeak. But Sandy is a great case study in, I think, the psychology of people, understanding, whether something's a threat or not, or whether it can happen in your location. So,
well, the thing is we were beach people. We are beach people. We're not tourists who are going to just go running every time there's a little gray cloud in the sky. And it people paid for that.
Right. And well, first of all, if you're a beach person, you live in these communities like here in Ocean Pines, even year round, you have so many days where it didn't happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? And as humans, we kind of look for patterns. So if you go years without something happening, or anytime something does happen with a storm, it only reaches, like you said, 5th Street or something like that, you get lulled into a sense of security that's really not there. So Hurricane Sandy is a great example. Hurricane Sandy's maximum wind speed, and I was looking this up here, was 115 miles per hour, right? That's a strong hurricane for the Northeast, certainly in the Mid-Atlantic, but 115 mile per hour winds did not impact New Jersey. In fact, as it was making its way up, into the Mid-Atlantic, it was actually weakening. So Hurricane Sandy on the scale was a low-end hurricane when it affected the area and actually started to lose some of its tropical characteristics, right? So the problem with Hurricane Sandy is it turned inward or inland, right? A lot of hurricanes tend to go north and northeast and kind of curve away from the ocean. We could talk about why here in a second, but Hurricane Sandy did something different. It actually turned inland, turned toward the coast, right? And it took its good old time moving in. It sat out there for a long time. So you had tropical storm force, low-end hurricane force winds that were consistent moving in. And I talked about fetch earlier, wind over water. The distance of that fetch was coming in off of the east-southeast, and that type of a fetch is just going to hammer a coastline. You do that for more than a few hours, it's easy to see that that water is going to come in, and it's going to come past areas that it usually hadn't in the past, because you all in New Jersey, down here through the mid-Atlantic, but especially New Jersey being the hardest hit, had not had a fetch like that of consistent high-level wind pushing in the ocean for that long.
Well, how does that? Talk about how that applies here. How the preparation is important.
So it's important here to know. Well, first, a few things to remember here. We're in a similar situation here in Ocean Pines, so it's not just about living along the coast. So in Ocean Pines here, we've got the St. Martin River that runs, just to the north of town, or basically the towns along the edge of it, right? So the St. Martin River curves off to the southeast, and it connects with the Isle of Wight Bay, and of course, to the north of that, you have the Assiniboine Bay, right? And it's hard here on an audio podcast to see this, but I encourage somebody to pull up a map to see what I'm talking about with this. So here in Ocean Pines, we have to remember that the wind direction is going to determine likely the most flooding. You can have a northerly wind that pushes water from the St. Martin River into Ocean Pines, right? But there isn't a lot of water that wind is picking up, because north to south over the river is a really small area. If you have an east-southeast wind, that wind is very typical of a wind direction that you get with a hurricane that's approaching from the south. So a southeast wind or east-southeast wind is going to cut across the Isle of Wight Bay, and it's going to go right up the St. Martin River, right? So you have all of that water, the Atlantic feeding, of course, the Isle of Wight Bay, but you have all that water being pushed towards Ocean Pines. So if we're in a scenario like that, you're going to see much higher than normal high tidal cycles. You're going to have much more coastal flooding. So to prepare for that is people would have to think about, when we're talking about these coastal storms coming up, how long is that wind going to be out of the east-southeast? How long or how high is the wind going to be, obviously, is a big issue, but how long is that fetch going to continue for? And that's the first thought here for if you have preparations to get out of the area, right? If you live in a spot that it's going to flood, it floods easily just when the full moon was out, but it also floods easily when you have systems like this. If you know that we're going to have an east-southeast wind for a considerable period of time with a storm like that, you might want to think about your plan to get out.
And well in advance.
Well in advance, right. So that brings me to the next point. Well, what's a plan to get out? What does that even mean? Well, obviously it's to get on the road and go. But the thing you got to remember here with Delmarva, and I'm not trying to be alarmist here, but it's something to think about ahead of time, is where will you go? So we have the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which that thing shuts down a lot. People don't realize they have wind advisories that close that bridge a lot.
3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
My daughter got, she was like the first one online when they're like, sorry,
can't go across. Now. Right. And what do you do at that point? Well, you have some options, but they take hours. Right. And that stinks that she had that happen. That happened to me one time. I'm from Rockville in the DC area, and I'm trying to come back, and the weatherman should know it's windy, but I don't think about it. I was just going to go over the bridge, and they shut it down. I had to go up around through Elkton and Cecil County and come back down through the north. So that was it was a fun drive. I didn't have anything to do, thankfully, but you're trying to evacuate an area. So that's problematic. Now, I think the Chesapeake Bay is probably going to stay open through higher wind than normal if they're trying to evacuate people off of the Delmarva. But you got to think, what's it like just trying to cross that bridge during beach traffic? So you have to think, where are you going to go? Chesapeake Bay Tunnel Bridge is our next option down the southern tip of Delmarva, right? Same idea. They're going to have wind restrictions and issues. And actually down there, if there's enough of a sea level rise, that can close that bridge down there. So the only other option...
When you're on the other side, you're still essentially in Ocean City, right? It's that you're not any higher.
You're not any higher, right? And that is a long distance to go. You're right about that. So that's not probably a great option if you're trying to get out of here close to storm time. So the only other way to get out of here is to the north. 113, you go up through up through northern Delaware, and you go out that way into Philadelphia Metro. More importantly, you should get into central Delmarva, and especially going north, the elevation rises. So, you're away from the coast anyway. But the point is that getting out of here when everyone else is trying to get out of here, that's a tough, tough thing. It's tougher than even your coastal areas that don't have bridges to get out of town. So, think ahead of time, plan B. If you have, and if you don't think that you can ride out a strong storm here, thinking about where you're going to go and, not waiting until the day of, if you will, a couple days out. So and it's a gamble. Sometimes, these storm tracks change a little bit and you didn't need to leave town because of it. And that gets a lot of people mad. And that adds to, I think, people's, lethargic response to prepping ahead of time.
One of the things that I recall from working down in Berlin also is the back roads that you might use aren't necessarily reliable in heavy weather. There's these sneaky little back roads from Berlin to Route 13, but I've had them be flooded before and had to turn around on those little tiny roads and go back to Berlin and just get on Route 50 like everybody else, because those are all wetland roads.
Well, Tony, that's exactly the problem here in Worcester County, right? Everything's wetland. So you have kind of a double whammy, or, a 1-2 punch here with water during these situations. So you have the fetch that I talked about, the coastal flooding starting to inundate the land. You might not see traditional flooding that far in these Berlin back roads, but because they're wetlands, there's nowhere for this water to go. And as the flooding starts and the seepage continues like inland, then you have the torrential rain. You have the flash flooding type rain. Again, nowhere for the water to go. It just sits. So you have this kind of like conglomeration of tidal flooding. And then you also have the fact that the water has nowhere to go with the flash flooding. It's this 1-2 mix that makes living here exceptionally problematic when trying to navigate the road system when we're in the middle of a tropical storm. I'll give you an example personally here. During Isaias, the summer of 2020, I think this is a great example of a landfalling tropical system that was not a hurricane that wreaked havoc here, right? We had a dozen tornadoes or close to it here on Delmarva. Here in Worcester County, we had a couple tornadoes. In fact, there was one near Ocean Pines that touched down. It was a brief tornado, but it caused a lot of damage. And while that was happening, I was storm chasing in the area here, and I remember getting off of a few of the main roads like Route 50, going to turn around. And this wasn't even in Worcester County. This is in Wycomico County. And just getting on some of these side roads, they were already starting to wash out, or they had that standing water because there was nowhere for it to go. That's not even here in Worcester County. So you can imagine how much worse it is in a place like this.
And if you get stuck, or should you prepare to be stuck, I think it only makes sense, right?
I think so, yeah. And I, to bring down people's anxiety with this, I think it's okay to be prepared to get stuck here because, it's not, if we have the Category 4, Category 5 storm that's barreling in and it looks like it's going to cause complete catastrophe, the chances of that are very, 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 very low. Again, I'm not going to go on here and say it can't happen, but more than likely not going to happen. So I think the most plausible thing is to prepare to be stuck. I think we had a trial run, if people want to think about it this way, here in Ocean Pines. We just had a trial run in February with the blizzard. Right?
I saw that, yeah.
So we had a 60-mile-per-hour wind gust at the Ocean City Airport. I think it was 60. Might have been a little higher than that. So a higher-end tropical storm force wind that we had during the blizzard. We had the heavy snow acting as paste on the trees and limbs, so it created extra drag. Well, that's kind of a simulation of what it's like during the summer when we have leaves on the trees. It creates extra drag, right? So that system brought down a ton of trees here in Ocean Pines. And, I'm sitting in here with Sarah Ash, and she is nodding her head. I know that was a huge problem out here, specifically in Ocean Pines. We had tropical storm type damage here with the trees coming down, and people were out of power for a long time. Maybe not everybody, but there were places I know in Salisbury, I was at parts of our area, we were out of power for a couple of days. Sussex County to our north, they had massive power outages during that. And you back down to Ocean Pines here, you had trees that were blocking the road. I saw a lot of pictures of people out there with chainsaws having to cut these trees away just so they can get out of their neighborhoods. That was a trial run. That was an example of what it's more likely to be if we go into a system like this, minus the flooding, of course. That's the other aspect of this. But preparing for that, not having power for a couple of days, keeping, your non-perishables, the stuff you hear about, the emergency kits, the very simple things here, having enough water and food that you can comfortably, maybe it's not the cuisine that you want, but, you could comfortably live for a couple of days without going to the grocery store, for instance, right? The other option is obviously power, having a generator. A lot of people don't have a generator, but if you just having, batteries that are charged up for your phone and your iPad, just so you can, exist and it's not such a bad experience while you wait for the power to come back on. I think those are things to think about. Another thing I would say, and I thought about this after this happened here in Ocean Pines with during the blizzard, we lost so many trees here, right? Think about that. And I know there are rules and HOA rules and stuff. I can't speak to any of that kind of stuff. But if there's that tree, you're talking about preparedness here. If there's that tree in your yard or that limb that looks like it's weak or it's dead, if that's something you've been putting off, maybe having somebody come in and get rid of, that's the smartest thing you can do well ahead of time. Check out your property, look for those weak trees. If you can, you've been putting it off, go ahead and take care of it early summer, because that's going to save you probably a headache if we do get enough winds to come in where that tree could come down on your house, or the street in front of, in your neighborhood, stuff like that. Now, there's no way to completely, obviously keep that from happening here. We can't go in and, cut down all the trees and stuff like that. But those are things you can think about ahead of time that might not seem like a big deal, but it could be a no-brainer, because that could be the tree that comes down during the storm that makes your life 10 times harder.
Yeah, that February storm was particularly hard, I think, specifically on pine trees.
Yeah,
because the ones at my house all got clobbered. I'm genuinely still picking them up,
I believe it.
A little bit at a time, because it was the trees stayed, but every branch came down, and of course, with the branches come all those the pine shots.
All the extras.
Removing by wheelbarrow at a time.
Jeez.
So what are some of the other things that people need to know before we're not out of time, but we've been chatting a bit, so I want to make sure you get in everything you want to make sure you get in.
I think that the important thing, obviously, I'm going to say this because I'm a chief meteorologist at WMDT. Tune in to watch our forecast. Tune in to local news wherever you are. You're vacationing, wherever you go. Keep an eye on those hurricane tracks. You see so much stuff online, right? There's so many posts that are Armageddon. They're not coming from reliable sources. Sometimes the way Facebook's algorithm, and I know Facebook's a big thing for this, people use, I use it all the time to put out weather information. The algorithm sometimes will show you something that's 3 weeks old, right?
Yes.
So I think this is a great time to remember going back to the basics here. Check in with a human to get your information. Check out the local news, not just from me and our team of meteorologists, right? It allows people like public officials in Ocean Pines, in Salisbury, in Ocean City, those places, you can check the news. They will tell you how the localities are preparing for it. You'll get a better understanding of where the people in charge, where their heads are at with what's going on. And I think that'll help to cut through the noise if you're hearing from a human meteorologist, a human city administrator on preparations or what could happen than some of the crud that you're seeing, filling the social media channels. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I can pass by, because you'll get more clarity. And yeah, sometimes we're going to be wrong. I mean, we're all human in this endeavor, but you want to seek out those experts that are giving you real-time, educated updates on what could happen. And I think when you do that, you're going to learn a little something about what's going on. You're going to be more informed. You're going to understand where there might be a deviation in the track or a deviation in the threat levels. You're going to understand a little better what your perceived threat level is, versus than just seeing where everything's online telling you you're going to die. So,
and I know you were trying to avoid this, but I'm not going to let you. You guys have like an app or something, though, if someone wanted to get.
Oh no, I'm not going to avoid this at all. No, I'm glad you brought it up.
You were trying to be generous to the competition, but you're the guy I'm talking to. So.
I appreciate it. Yeah, the WMDT weather app. So what's cool about this app is it's free. I mean, that's always a good thing, right? But more importantly, we update it several times daily with video updates from the meteorologist, from the human, and you will always get a video update on there. What's important is you will also get an update on there if we all lose power. We lost power at the station during the blizzard. I was still able to update that app with weather updates from my phone. It was crude, but it was from the human still telling you what was going on. That app is really helpful too because it has a radar on it. You could just track thunderstorms on it, right? So I think a video update from a human, a radar that you have access to that you can track the weather, it's all good. You can set up alerts to get weather alerts to your phone. And it's a great app to use when you're just trying to go out for the day and enjoy being outside and you see the skies might get dark. You can pop on that app and just look at the radar and say, okay, we got this going on. And then you can go ahead and look at the latest forecast from one of us that can give you a little more context on what's happening.
Excellent. And that is all I have for you, unless you have something else for me. Is there anything else that I didn't ask or something you thought you'd get the chance to say?
I'm sorry. I ramble a lot when I get in some of these subjects here. I get really excited about these things.
It's been a blast.
I just think I'm just trying to go through my notes here. I was just looking at some of the notable storms that we had. I think we covered most everything. And I think here, I think that we kind of hit the big things here. The travel, remember, reminding people that, you got to kind of plan ahead for the travel. That was kind of my big sticking point too. I think people get kind of lulled in a sense of security out here with that. So I think we hit pretty much everything.
All right. So, well, thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it, man.
If this is your first time hearing a show with Rich on it, I told you, he's crazy charming and he's really super interesting. If you follow him socially, Instagram and Facebook, he does these great videos, and you can find him through the WMDT website. Summer has begun, and I hope you have a safe and sane one. I hope I have a safe and sane one. But I'll be back in another couple weeks. Actually, right before July 4th, we'll have another show coming out. I'm really looking forward to that. And if you are a new listener, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening now. Tell your friends, and you can also go and listen to back episodes. I notice every week we have more and more people not only starting to listen to this show, but also going back to listen to previous shows. So welcome to the new listeners, and thanks for staying with us if you are a traditional listener. The Pines Cast has been an Ocean Pines Association production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo, executive producer, Sarah Ash. You can get in touch with us by emailing info@oceanpines.org. If you have any requests or any suggestions or criticisms, I don't mind criticisms, I can take it. You can email me directly. My email address is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. That is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. Again, have a great summer, and I will check in with you next time.